when we talk about saving our country, everybody's asking me about it, and I've been open about it. They say, hey, Jack, you know, I seen this picture of you with a binder. It says Jeffrey Epstein on it. Now all of a sudden the DOJ's come out with their memo. What's going on? I said, wait a minute. First of all, I uploaded all that stuff from the binder the day I got it. The very first day I got it, I put it up, and I said, here's the link. Everyone can see it. The problem was all the stuff that had been in that binder, it had kind of already been released through various court cases. And there was actually an itemized list that came from one of the search warrants that had not yet been published. So one page, basically, an item sheet. But all of this obviously been a huge controversy. People waiting for answers. They say, wait a minute, we were promised answers. We haven't got those answers. And I thought, you know what? With your law enforcement background, right? When I was in the military, I was an intelligence agent. So we had different missions. I was just trying to collect all the information I could, and we were going to go either roll somebody up or put warheads on foreheads. I didn't have to worry about a court case. I didn't have to worry about, you know, having a warrant or all of these, for me, like just these extra pieces of the puzzle that law enforcement would have to put into. So can you try to distill some of this for us? How do these cases work, and do the items that people want, does that actually exist?
Well, that's a good question. I think that the problem that we have now is that we have no idea what we don't know. Right? I mean, we don't know if the information was available, meaning the investigation material was available and it's been deleted, so therefore they really don't have anything to present. We don't know if they have something to present, but they refuse to present it. We don't know if Kesh Patel and Dan Bongino wants to present it, but Pam Bondi doesn't. We don't know if all of them want to present it, but Trump don't want it to happen. So it's a lot to be involved in, and I'll tell you this from a law enforcement perspective, is that you always got to have an open mind. Don't get married to a narrative, because it's very scary in the terrain that we're in, because we don't know who to trust and who's divulging information or not. And what I can say is that, just so everybody's clear, and I love Donald Trump, he's my favorite president, I'll vote for him 15 times if it was legal. But the investigation started a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
This wasn't an investigation that started when Epstein went to jail. This was an investigation that concluded in part when Epstein went to jail. So the first Trump administration had to be privy to what information was available that caused him to be arrested and put into jail.
Right.
Now, beyond that point, both administrations, the Biden and the Trump administration, had to know if there is actually a list or not. And the fact that we don't know the truth about it is concerning to me. But what I will say this, I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that we should trust the people who we've trusted for so many years, that eventually the truth will come out. Donald Trump is a man of integrity. I've known that. I think Kesh Patel is a man of integrity. I don't know Pam Bondi much. Dan Bongino is one of my favorites. So I'm just waiting to say there's more to the story. I want to let it play out, and we'll see where it ends up.
So you mentioned the 2019 arrest, and people, of course, remember that's why he was in jail. But what people, I think, forget, and you know that gets lost in the story, I should say, is that he was in jail pending trial.
Right.
So that trial never took place. Now, a lot of this material, I think, probably, and this is something that law enforcement and prosecutors, they wouldn't make that public. Why? Because they wouldn't want to tip off Epstein's lawyers as to what their strategy would be. Now, of course, they would have to give it to him eventually at some point, but because his death happened when it did, suspicious death, to say the least, when it happened when it did, we never got that trial. So all of that information, that's got to exist somewhere, because, of course, they were building a case against him.
Right, and Ghislaine Maxwell is in jail right now.
Precisely.
For exactly that. There had to be evidence presented against her for her to be in jail. There has to be crimes, because she was the middle person between connecting victims to the suspects. And so with all of that information, the details had to be presented to her in court, against her in court, for her to even be able to go to jail and be sentenced. So it existed, but this is not something new, man. This is mob tactics. This is hood tactics. If there is no person to testify in court, then there you go. The evidence will not be revealed.
Look, I'm from the Philly area, and they got a certain saying about snitches in the Philly area, right? They say, because people say, actually, the New York Times did it's funny you mention that, they did a study just recently, said, I think it's only 58% of homicides are solved in the United States. And I said, well, in Philly, I know why. I'll tell you exactly why that is. That's because nobody saw nothing. Nobody heard nothing. Nobody saw nothing. Wait a minute, you were right there. This Ring camera, I didn't see nothing. I didn't hear nothing. I didn't see nothing.
Because snitches get stitches is what they say. I don't agree with it. right? I think snitching is humble. You need to snitch on these people to get these.
But I'm
people
saying
off the streets.
that's the dynamic that leads people to not be able. Like, if you don't have any information, what are you going to investigate?
Well, check this out. I mean, we got to think too. There's implications that there could be incredibly powerful people that are associated with the crimes committed by Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. With that being said, how do you think it's possible that if those people are potentially involved in this, that he would ever make it to trial? They would not let it happen. Either he's saving face by doing it to himself, or somebody else made sure that he couldn't testify.
You know, and I remember saying this, and I'll say it again. You know, people get mad at me. I said, look, when you mentioned about not being married to your hypothesis, they do teach us that as well in intelligence school. And one of the things they do to help us to fight against that or prevent that mentally is what they teach us is an ACH. They want you to construct an analysis of competing hypotheses. And then when you do that, you actually, basically it's like competing against each hypothesis. So you lay it out, then you lay out the next one, then you lay out the third one, and you think, okay, was he murdered? All right. Was he murdered by a guard? Was he murdered by a prisoner that was on the block with him? Or did he commit suicide? Does he commit suicide? And then you put out and you lay out all the evidence for each. You lay out how each of it would work. And so one of the ones that I even said, which I do kind of wonder about, is because I do trust Cash and Dan, and they said, we don't think someone did that. And I said, okay, what if he felt intimidated? What if he felt he was being threatened? And if so, that drove him to kill himself. Now, on paper, you would call that suicide, but in the real world, we know that's something else.
1,000%, man. It's not above reality for somebody who's facing potentially the rest of their lives in prison and being the fall man, who eventually somebody will kill him anyway, I think, that he will be the fall man indicting all these other people.
So you want to live the rest of your life looking over your shoulder?
Right.
Or
I mean, you think this guy was living on a high horse. We don't know how he made his money, but he was rich. He had one of the nicest places in New York City, flying private everywhere. He knew everybody. I mean, just the arrogance of a narcissist like that would probably lead them to say, I can't spend the rest of my life in prison, knowing that he probably would spend the rest of his life in prison if they knew what was actually out there with evidence. But what I will say is this. I use the same theology that you're saying about everything in life. You never get married to a thesis. Even with my faith in God, I say, I'm going to challenge my faith. You got to
challenge it, yes.
When someone approaches me with information about the Bible or anything else, I don't shy away from it and say, well, I'm a Christian, so I can't consider it. No, I'm going to consider every principle, because what does it do? It makes you stronger. It makes you deep. It makes you go deeper in your faith when you find out that the things you believe are real. That's how I became a conservative. I said, I'm not going to listen to what people are saying I should believe because I'm black. Let me evaluate it for myself. And with that being said, that's how I became conservative.
You know, that's such a good way of putting it. And that really is, I think, the start of conservatism, right? Is that there was that heat map that came out recently. They said, you know, they were looking at social media and they said, here are liberals and their talking points, and here are conservatives, their talking points. And they said the liberals, it was like a fist, right? Because it was all this one solid spot. They all talk about the same thing. They all believe the same thing. But then for conservatives, it was a web. And it was sort of, you know, and it was a cluster, but, you know, it was like, okay, here's your libertarians, here's your America First guys, you know, here's your anti-trans, you know, and there were various different nodes along this web, because that's what conservatism is. It's not lockstep conformity. It is, in fact, critical thought and critical reasoning.
Critical thought, critical reason in comparison to emotionalism.
Yes.
The way that they're able to get certain people to have a heat map that's that strong is they get them emotional. And people that don't know how to manage their emotions, this is how they fall into a trap of being deceived 100%. If you do an evaluation, I haven't done it yet, I'm pretty sure if the science came out, it would be the people that tend to lean left and listen to the foolery that they're putting out in the media, they're doing it through weaponized empathy, weaponized emotions, and conservatives aren't those type of people. And that's why you see certain demographics of people that are leaning more conservative, whether it be sex or whether it be race or whatever, you see a difference in the way they receive information, and you see the way it's presented by how they vote.